Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Pressplay Podcast. Today I'm excited to be joined by a partner in crime, Devang Mehta, who's joined Pressplay Capital as a partner. Devang comes with a rich and diverse experience, having worked and studied in the US and then more recently in India. He's one of the best known faces in the venture capital ecosystem. He helped, was the founding member of the Antil Ventures Category 1 VC fund. He's on the board of a bunch of B2B and healthcare startups. He's a sports enthusiast, very relevant to Pressplay's thesis. And his academic pedigree includes a computer science degree from the Carnegie Mellon University, as well as an MBA from the same place. And he's a lifelong sports enthusiast, which we love. His favorite teams include Mumbai Indians, the Indian cricket team, and of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is one of the headline teams in the NFL in the US. Welcome, Devang.
Thank you, Vinit. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Delighted to be here. Yes, it's great to be a part of the Pressplay Capital team with its wonderful investment thesis and focus on the attention economy, which we all know is one of the fastest growing sectors in the investment ecosystem.
Absolutely, man. I think it's so fantastic and really happy to have you join the team. For our listeners and viewers, it'll be fantastic if you can just take a few minutes to introduce yourself. I know you've worn multiple hats from being an operator, investor, board member across India and Silicon Valley. So why don't you go for it? Introduce yourself and then maybe share some highlight lessons for entrepreneurs building.
Yes, so I think you've covered a fair bit of it in the introduction, but thanks again to reiterate. I'm an investor and advisor. I'm based here in Mumbai. My career started off as a technologist. I was a software developer for many years after earning a master's in computer science from Indiana University. And then I changed course a little bit. I decided to go for an MBA at Carnegie Mellon Stepper School of Business. That's where I essentially fell in love with venture capital through academic coursework, actually, and some interactions with local VCs who were also CMU alums. Post that, I moved to the Bay Area and I worked at two or three startups. That's where I had, in some sense, the first practical exposure to venture capital as part of a startup team that pitched to VCs and angel investors and raised some funds for growth. I moved back to India in 2016. I got into some angel investing with a close childhood friend of mine based in Bangalore. We made a couple of angel investments, and for me, that was really the way to get into the startup ecosystem in India, completely embedded through by advising these startups, by investing in them, and helping them grow through, into newer growth trajectories. I joined Antel in 2017. It's a very interesting concept and one of the best known organizations at that in building fund accelerators. And what that means is that we just don't provide capital, we also provide a whole scaling ecosystem alongside it for portfolio companies. We invest in companies and then, through partners, both technological channel partners, PR, whatever a startup needs to scale to the next level is provided by this fund accelerator and the ecosystem surrounding it. So I was there for 5 years. I also am associated with Antel as an advisor, helping harvest the investments we've made. But I am also working closely with you as we build our the next gen attention economy fund, and also I'm on the board of a couple of startups in the B2B space as well as the healthcare industry.
Awesome, nice. That's quite an experience. I'm sure building Antil had its valuable lessons and learnings that you could apply for a fund like Pressplay Capital, which is still in its formative years. Um, and I think we've seen that you are one of the well-known faces in the Indian startup ecosystem today. You write actively on LinkedIn. What drove your early conviction in the space?
I think Indians are naturally entrepreneurial. We have a very healthy insouciance for corporate life at a certain level. People like to just fork off and start up their own companies and innovate in certain areas, be it fintech, edtech, healthcare. And I think the early 2000s was a great inflection point of the harvesting of this entrepreneurial talent, the emergence of early stage venture capital funds. Eventually, maybe 5, 7 years later, the growth of incubators associated with premier academic institutions, especially the IITs, and the general understanding and appreciation of how venture capital and startup ecosystems work in tango to build innovation and act as a genuine driver of GDP growth in our country.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And how do you personally, define? You've been on the investing side, so I guess the next question is more on the investments, or the way you think about investments. How do you personally define a great early stage investor? What are the things uh, that an early stage investor needs to look out for?
Yeah, so there's two things here. When you say look out for, since most of the investments I made were at seed and pre-series A, I think a lot depends on the founding team, because at that point it's the one constant in the journey that you will invest in and harvest and help grow. The startup is bound to have personnel changes, pivots in its business model, develop beachheads in one area, fail at others. A lot will change in the next 5, 7 years. But what stays constant is the pedigree and the DNA of the founding team and the culture they build around themselves. So to be able to source and locate these deals that have been created by startups that have been created by great founders that have the ability to to traverse newer growth trajectories is the greatest trait of an early stage VC. And that is a function of being uber networked across the ecosystem, both literally through LinkedIn, through alumni events, through traditional networking channels and all. But the ability to locate and source these deals is what sets apart a good early stage VC from another. Of course, once you've sourced these investments and made the investment decision and the money has been wired, then your personal traits and being a good equal partner to these startups, helping them grow, empathy, understanding of the business situation, helping them build partnerships, helping them understand the go to market and strategy and refine it, all those traits that you bring on, especially as someone who's been in operational roles in early stage companies, that help and that advice is invaluable for startups.
No, absolutely. I think one of the things that at Pressplay Capital, as you know, we like to think that we are good at, is essentially building a nice startup flywheel, as I call it, as to why should startups come to you also, right? As even it works even the other way around. Today, startups more than ever before have a choice of so many investors, domain experts, that they can get money from. If they're a good company with a good team, capital is not a constraint. However, working with the right set of venture capital or investor founders early on in your journey is super important, and we also believe that. So no, that's absolutely right. It's about not only establishing your professional network and net worth, but also playing a role in helping these companies grow. So I think
Right.
that's fundamental, and that learning that you had at Antel will really hold us in good stead. Um, and then you know you've had a focus on multiple areas. You had a focus on B2B SaaS. You had healthcare, and you love sports. So what about the attention economy is specifically of interest? How do you see it grow? uh, yeah.
Like, so I can talk about sports. I've been a sports enthusiast my whole life. As a participant, I played cricket at different levels through my school and college years and keep following it. I also am a big fan of American football. Since being at CMU, I was a big fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers for 20 odd years now, and other sports too. So I think not just has it been a hobby, but over the years I've become acquainted with the economics around it and how technology reshapes the fan experience, And also from an athlete standpoint, how to preempt disease, how to preempt injury, and God forbid if you do get injured, how to rehabilitate faster through personalized uh, interventions that AI and other technologies help engender. So sports, the other good part of it is that I think it's somewhat, at least at a consumer level, it's recession independent. It's this. In fact, I would contend, somewhat anecdotally, but that when there's a lot of geopolitical headwinds, people actually tend to spend more time on sports just to relax. I mean, it's a way to get away from the distractions and the angst that a lot of geopolitics causes. And as a result, there's eventually more spending on sports events, maybe merchandise or better technologies, better fan experience. I'm not a fan of betting, but it eventually leads to that to some extent. So sports tends to grow a lot, somewhat independent of geopolitical headwinds, because again, at the consumer, at the price at which they pay for a product or service, is well within the realms of discretionary income. Like a better viewing experience, a trip to the stadium, customized fan engagement. It's not a big drain on the discretionary budget. So it tends to grow somewhat independent of other factors in the economy. And I think it leads itself to a much more valuable and satisfying experience, as well as for startups, huge, gargantuan addressable markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, that of course feeds into how exit friendly these companies can be. Because the larger the market, the larger the affinity for fans to adapt and adopt these new technologies and and sports in general. I would say that it probably holds true for the attention economy as a whole, in terms of the recession proof nature of it. Whether it's gaming or media tech and streaming, what you're consuming and playing, it fits in nicely into that recession proof and sort of a stress free environment that people are craving. um, and hey, this is more it's needed more today than ever before, the world we live in,
Right.
with
Exactly. I
everything.
think there's so much, sorry to interrupt, but there's so much angst around a lot of these things. So I think sports viewing is likely to go up, if not stay constant. And then, as you rightly said, the moment there's more people watching sports and for a longer time, it naturally blends into more advertising dollars and more targeted advertising, and the whole attention economy comes very much into the fore.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What are some of the uh, red flags that you think investors and especially early stage investors should watch out for when they are looking at startups?
I think some of the red flags are typical of any startup. You have to make sure the founding team is of the right pedigree, of the right ability to scale a startup to growth hack in the geography of choice, at least as it relates to beachheads. You have to be somewhat cognizant that the regulatory landscape might change to your to your disadvantage. We all know what happened to Dream 11 and the tax that they were forced to pay on account of regulatory changes in India, which happens with some frequency. So you have to be careful of those kind of red flags, that your investment is not suddenly hit by changes in legislation. And I think broadly, the ad economy, ad tech has been characterized time and again by fraud, fraudulent inventory, gamification around maximizing CPM at the cost of, shall we say, ethics or things like that. So the investments you make should be, you should be cognizant of these red flags when you make an investment in the attention economy.
Yeah, good one. Good one, absolutely. I think one of the things, someone asked me this question as to what do you guys look at, and I said that very few people that I know actually look at this metric, but it's important to me and I think to us is the reliability of the founder. You might be a brilliant person and have a great product, but if your trustworthiness and reliability is of question, then it's a big red flag. I think case in point is what's happening with Blue Smart in India. If one startup can essentially color red the entire ecosystem, so those are things that are also important. Completely with you on the ad tech side of things. We live in a world where people are trying to buy eyeballs, as they say.
Right.
So we need to caution against that. And then from the founder perspective, in your experience, uh, how do like how do they view VCs as per you? In Anthill, for example, what kind of relationship did you have with the founding team, or they had with you in general?
Yeah, well, it does vary from founder to founder. I think savvy founders, the ones that to me, have had the right upbringing and experiences in life, by the time they're in the early 30s or so, understand that this is value added capital. And as a result, even after the investment is made, they don't balk at advice, as in, like, just, hey, we're done with the investment. Let us grow. Let us manage our company. We'll let you know every quarter how we're growing. Savvy founders don't act like that. In fact, they solicit advice, they solicit connections, and they work joined at the hip with investors, without being macro managed, or investors feeling the need to micromanage startups. Yes, there are others that do feel that the only thing VCs bring in is capital, and those work equations are harder to crack, as they say. But with time, I think good working relationships can be developed with all founders, no matter how level the how hollow or deep the investment is. Eventually, workable relations can be made to a point where it benefits both the investor and the startup.
Nice, got it. And I have to ask you this question because you're based in Bombay, I'm based in Dubai. Our third team member, Yash, who actually represents what the current generation of, let's say Gen Z or Gen A, what they're consuming and playing. So he's also part of the team strategically. Um, how do you view the Middle East India corridor? A lot has been spoken about and continued to be written about how folks are moving to this part of the world, uh, and so on and so forth. But how do you view our thesis that we're looking at Middle East and India?
I think it's definitely a very exciting geography. Someone I met the other day described Dubai India corridor as a new Silk Route of world trade.
Ah,
So,
nice.
but that soaring rhetoric aside, I think definitely there's a lot of capital in the UAE, and there's a lot of innovation in India, and there's of course capital in India also. But per capita investment dollars are probably more in the UAE by some distance. And the beauty of it is a lot of the population in the UAE is the Indian diaspora, right? And the people they know. So the consumption preferences in terms of sports, in terms of food, in terms of content and all is very similar to Indians. So it's the same consumption preferences with a higher propensity to pay for content and offerings, which makes it a very fertile ground for, let's say, Indian startups and innovation that comes from India to migrate, quote unquote, to the Middle East. And by the same token, a very nice dynamic for capital from UAE to enter India.
Hmm. Right,
So
because we also have a double tax treaty, right? So it makes it easier.
right. So taxation wise, it's set up fairly well, and I
Yeah.
think of later diplomatic relationships have been sound and synergistic. All lends itself to a great investment corridor.
Yeah. No, that definitely. Um, I think even symbolic things like the Abu Dhabi Hindu temple, right? It might be a cultural, flag bearer in the Middle East. However, the way it's come about and the way our current administration in India have built those bridges and connections with the government here uh, really augurs well for an encouragement for Indians to look at the UAE specifically um, much more seriously in terms of even whether it's location, investments, resources, and so on. Yeah. So yeah, good point. And then I think you mentioned about Devang about your experience at Anthill for being a fund accelerator. I think we also in Pressplay Capital tend to gravitate towards that sort of thesis in a way because we're a smaller fund, right? So every dollar needs to go farther, and
Right.
one way we make that happen is back startups where we think that we can also really turbocharge growth and distribution through whether it's go to market hacks or partnerships or introductions. Uh, and of course, we need to make sure that we a great point that you made was that we need to make sure that the startup founders need to be receptive of that advice or help. Um, in at Antil, I mean, what was the process like of that interaction? Was it like a cadence that was set up with the founders, or how did that work?
Yeah, so until it was a bit more formalized because we were by thesis a fund accelerator.
Hmm.
So every startup we invested in had some acceleration element. It could be
Hmm.
technical, it could be business wise, it could be PR, it could be at arm's length, it could be tightly coupled, but there was an element of acceleration provided to startups.
Hmm.
But in general, I think, like I said, there's a few things here. I think Indian startups specifically tend to be a bit engineering heavy, all said and done.
Right.
So these teams have raw intellectual horsepower when it comes to technology, and always tend to be a bit light on business savvy and articulation. So
Absolutely.
a true, especially, and there's no perfect science to it, but especially this is true for teams that are in the late 20s, below age 30.
Hmm.
They are very sharp technically, but always struggle with the business flavored elements of growth.
Hmm.
So they need capital and advice. Whether they accept it or not is a different thing. The more stubborn ones balk at it, the more modest ones embrace it. But the fact of the matter is they need value added capital, which an institutional VC can provide through you know, uh, raw investment power, as well as the deep connects, the advice, the strategy, the handholding needed to navigate, uh, difficult waters.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, I think um, startups that some of the startups that I've spoken to uh, at the early stage tend to underestimate what it will take
Right.
to,
They are so enamored by their own tech,
yeah,
which is not surprising necessarily because that's why they're in business and not doing corporate jobs. But they don't understand the ramifications of certain growth decisions, which that has to be moderated by an investment professional.
yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Um, and then, I guess since we're having a informal chat, where are you investing nowadays? Of course, startup investments is one part of it, but what else are you looking at?
Well, I mean, from a portfolio standpoint, I remain invested across public markets and private equity. Private startups, I should say. Private equity normally means late stage.
Hmm.
I do love the attention economy for sure. I love sports techs companies, especially ones that provide good intersection points between AI, ML, and athlete performance, as well as athlete
Hmm.
interaction. I like the health tech space, not healthcare, because healthcare in India has sometimes been understood as two, three things: just giving cheap medicines at your doorstep, discounted medication, or creating great CRMs for doctors to write prescriptions, and
Right.
the consummation of that through insurance and all that. That cycle better done through digitization, which is great, but it's not deep innovation in my humble opinion. But there
Right.
is a fast emerging and very alluring biotech sector coming up in India. I
Mm-hmm.
am closely associated with a company called Early Sign that does early cancer detection through saliva. The
Mm-hmm.
first Indian company to do this. Their in clinical trials will be hitting the market soon.
Mm-hmm.
I am talking to companies that do cancer cure through a next gen technology called CAR-T, CAR-T.
Yeah.
That is the next gen innovation in immuno-oncology and very powerful, of course, with the right team, but it's an area of immense growth in the future in health tech.
Mm-hmm.
I like B2B SaaS models, cloud-based companies that are creating efficiencies in logistics or technology adoption
Mm-hmm.
of any kind. So that remains an area of interest. So that covers the startup ecosystem. Of course, the
Mm-hmm.
companies that come into our flywheel, as you call it, sports and ad tech, are areas of highly exponential growth in India when done right. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that I think is going to surprise us is gaming. Uh, and of course, there's finding the right startup in that space is a challenge because a lot of gaming investors have come up of late.
correct.
And when you see some of the folks who are 20 to 25, whether they are in the Middle East, India, or anywhere else in the world. I think the world becomes so much smaller now that a 20 to 25-year-old sitting anywhere would most likely have at least 80 to 85% common interests.
Yes.
And in that common interest is gaming. Bang in the center of it is gaming.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things that we would look at. But it's been a pleasure, man, Devang. Thank you for sharing very valuable insights. I hope this has been a great experience for our viewers and listeners. We are incredibly excited to start this journey at Pressplay Capital. And we would invite entrepreneurs and investors and anyone really to hit us up, whether you're in Mumbai, Dubai, or anywhere else in the world. If you're in Mumbai or Dubai, happy to have a coffee or a beer. And if you're anywhere else in the world, happy to connect via call. Um, Thanks, Devang.
Likewise, really enjoyed the interaction, Vinith. And yes, delighted to meet investors, startups, any ecosystem partners in Mumbai. If you are keen to participate in this attention economy and what we're doing, happy to meet you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.